Jack Daniels built the most famous whiskey brand in the world. Then he died from kicking a safe. It sounds like a joke, but it's actually the least interesting part of his story. This is Sticks and Spirits and the men behind the bottle. Jack Daniel wasn't supposed to be successful at all. He was born in the mid-1800s, and the records aren't perfect. But what we do know is this: he lost both of his parents young and was on his own early. No formal education, no family business to step into, and somehow he ends up building a whiskey empire that still dominates today. He was taken in as a teenager by a preacher named Dan Call, who also happened to run a still. Now today, that sounds strange. A preacher making whiskey? But back then it wasn't. On the frontier, people wore multiple hats: farmers, community leaders, and sometimes distillers. Because whiskey wasn't just a drink. It was a way to preserve grain and to hold value. It was in many times a currency. But here's where it gets interesting. Jack didn't just learn from Dan Call. He learned from an enslaved man named Nathan Nearest Green, who taught him a technique that would define everything that came next: filtering whiskey through charcoal before it ever touched a barrel. That part matters, because from the very beginning, this wasn't just luck, it was process. As the country changed, so did the way people thought about alcohol. The temperance movement started gaining ground, and suddenly, being a preacher and a distiller didn't sit the same way anymore. So Dan Call stepped away. And Jack didn't start from nothing. He stepped into something. He takes over the operation, and he keeps Nearest Green with him. Now he's just not learning anymore, he's responsible for it. And instead of chasing growth or trying to do something flashy, Jack becomes obsessed with one thing: consistency. Same process, same charcoal filtering, same quality over and over again. That's the DNA of what we now call Jack Daniels. And that charcoal step, that's what separates Tennessee whiskey from bourbon. Because bourbon goes straight into the barrel, but Tennessee whiskey, it gets filtered first through charcoal. It smooths it out. It takes the edge off. Legally, Tennessee whiskey can still be called bourbon, but it isn't, because that extra step changes the identity. And here's the part that most people skip up until this point. Whiskey wasn't really a brand. It was something you made and something people drank locally. Then Jack makes a decision that changes everything. He starts bottling it. Square bottles. Consistent labeling. Something you can recognize without tasting it first. And that's the shift. That's the moment this stops being just whiskey and becomes a brand. And then there's the story everyone knows. Jack shows up one morning, he can't remember the combination to his safe, and kicks it. He breaks his toe, an infection sets in. And years later, that injury contributes to his death. It sounds ridiculous, but in a strange way it fits. Because even at the end, Jack Daniel was still showing up to work. And here's the truth most people never knew. Jack Daniel never saw this become the global giant we know today. That happened later, after Prohibition nearly wiped the entire industry out. And during that time, guys like George Remus were building fortunes, selling whatever whiskey people could get their hands on. Because demand never went away, and brands like Jack Daniel's were part of that demand. Then in 1956, Brown-Forman acquires the brand, and they don't change the product. They scale it, distribution, marketing, global reach. That's when it becomes not just a great whiskey, but the most recognized whiskey in the world. Jack Daniel didn't just build a whiskey. He built a system that other people turned into an empire. And every time you pour a glass, you're tasting something that hasn't really changed in over 100 years. If you want to taste this story, pour a glass of Jack Daniel's Single Barrel and pair it with a medium-bodied Dominican cigar, smooth and consistent, just like the system he built. This is Men Behind the Bottle. Until next time, keep your sticks lit, keep your spirits high. Cheers.